wondered if the cycle of conflict will ever get better within your marriage or relationship? Or maybe question if you're really even supposed to be with that person because of all of your conflict? Well, don't throw in the towel so fast. The problem isn't the conflict per se. The real problem is how we view and handle the conflict. Because conflict can actually connect us and grow us closer. Oh yeah, I'm not referring to conflict centered around certain types of addictions, abuse, and abandonment, but more so the typical fights, disagreements, conflicts, miscommunication, and misunderstandings that take place that can create those slow leaks where over time you look up and you go, is this even worth it? So let's go. 3 ways that wives can manage and reduce conflicts in their marriage. Number 1, their approach. Number 2, their attitude. And number 3, their accountability. Okay, ladies, the first way we can manage and reduce conflict in our marriages or relationships is our approach. When there is a need, a disagreement, a misunderstanding, a concern, an offense, or misunderstanding, or something that can escalate to conflict that you need to address, what's your approach? Do you go in with the mindset of, I'm gonna just tell him about himself. I'm gonna tell it like it is and not hold back? We can do that, I've done that, but that often doesn't get us to our desired outcome. I love the work of world-renowned marriage and relationship experts, Doctors Julie and John Gottman. During times of engaging in conflict with a spouse or partner, they talk about the differences between what they call a harsh startup and a soft startup, and how it's a predictor of how the rest of the conversation is going to go, and quite often, how the relationship will go. As a matter of fact, they state that 96% of the time, the outcome of a conversation is predicated on the first 3 minutes of a 15-minute interaction. So in essence, how you start the conflict is the way you're probably going to end the conflict, and if it will get resolved. And don't I know this personally, all too well. A harsh startup will most likely lead you further down the rabbit hole of conflict and likely end up being unresolved, only building up the momentum and frustration. A harsh startup is just that. It's when the start of a conversation begins harshly with criticism, cutting remarks, attacks, sarcasm, blame, and belittling. And not to mention that little extra harshness and spice that's in your tone and volume. This approach carries an attitude of indignation, disrespect, and contempt. And speaking of attitude, this takes us to our second point of how we can manage and reduce conflict in our marriages and relationships. The second way wives can manage and reduce conflict in our relationships and our marriages is by our attitude. There is definitely some overlap with our first point of approach and the second point of attitude. So in our approach, we discuss the importance of not having a harsh startup, which leads us into our attitude. It's not what you say, but how you say it. So instead of starting off with a harsh startup, the Gottmans point out the significance of a soft startup. They state that using a softened startup is crucial in resolving conflicts before it even begins. It's a proven way to bring up a legitimate disagreement, concern, issue, complaint, or a need without blaming your partner or judging their character. It takes a certain attitude to have this soft startup. A soft startup doesn't necessarily mean the volume of your voice. We can speak softly and quietly, and yet those soft words can be a loaded arsenal attack. The soft startup is when you start off by not attacking, assuming, criticizing, insulting, blaming, and using absolute language such as you always and you never. Additionally, don't let the word soft mislead you. Two truths can coexist at one time. You can be sweet and soft and still be very much strong and assertive. You can be soft without being a softie. Being soft is not synonymous with being walked over, not having a voice and opinion, or not being an independent thinker. Again, you can be strong and bold, yet still be graceful and relish in your femininity. You can be upset and frustrated and still speak with kindness, respect, and grace. You can make a complaint and do it in a way that doesn't turn to criticism. Unfortunately, when our feelings take the driver's seat, we can go way off on a tangent without realizing it. And instead of describing our feelings in the situation that's bothering us, we begin to describe the shortcomings of our partner, attacking the person and not the problem. We describe what's wrong with the spouse versus what's wrong with the situation. We go overboard with describing what we see instead of what we seek. According to the Gottmans book, Fight Right, they give a very succinct formula for a soft startup that allows us to describe the problem and not our spouse. That formula states how you feel, your emotions, about the situation or the problem, and what you need moving forward. It describes you and how you are feeling. And it describes the actual problem without describing the shortcomings of your spouse and without throwing shade or blame. It's done in a context where you are talking about the situation, not about your husband or your partner. So an example would be, instead of saying to your husband, "You never take me out, but I bet if I was one of your guys calling, you'd find the time to go out with them. Must be nice." Now, there may be some truth in that statement, but because it's from a place of using absolutes, attacks, and sarcasm, I'm just not too sure how well this will end. But because it's a harsh startup, like the Gottman said, it's probably going to end up not being resolved and even perpetuated. Now, the soft startup option may look more like this. "I feel lonely and overlooked when you go out so much with your friends and not so much with me. I would really like us to start going back out together and spending more time together." So, in that statement, you described you, how you feel about a specific situation, and then you stated clearly what you need moving forward. Now, that took 2 sentences, and it'll probably get you a lot further along to what you really want, a lot quicker, and more efficiently, more effectively than the first option, which was the harsh startup. The third way that wives can reduce and manage conflict within their marriages is by your accountability. I know that's a rough one. I hear this a lot from men, how we don't want to be held accountable. How if we're wrong, we can't own it and we can't take full responsibility for how we may contribute to a situation. Men have said that they are blamed for every problem that arises and they have to admit they're wrong even when they're not. And how women feel they are never to blame, rarely at fault, and don't contribute to conflicts. Now, in all reality and honesty, my younger me would say, that sounds about accurate. And if the woman does play a role in conflict, it was probably warranted for good reason. But I've been transformed and I've learned the value of error in that way of thinking and the value in using a little bit more wisdom. So ladies, how well are we holding ourselves accountable for how we may contribute or play a role in a disagreement, in misunderstandings, and in conflict? Being accountable is the willingness to accept responsibility for your role, for your actions, and for how you may have contributed. Taking ownership of how we show up, even when it isn't our best, is crucial in mitigating and managing conflict. Being able to express humility and admit your part, take responsibility for your role without deflecting and making an excuse, and doing the work to do things differently is what being accountable looks like. So, if you're wrong, you're wrong. If there was a better way to do or say something, acknowledge it, apologize, and take actions to do it in a more excellent way. So, in closing, conflict is inevitable, but being aware of how we play a role in conflict, our approach, our attitude, and how accountable we choose to be makes the difference in how we move forward with conflict. If it pushes us further apart, snowballing and even creating new conflict, or if conflict is mitigated, bringing us closer and more connected.